This program contains adult content.
Is there a God?
Big atheist.
Really?
What, am I an idiot? Come on.
That yes, it would be nice if you could throw your sins and your responsibilities on someone else. But it's not true.
It looks like far-left lunacy.
I don't believe that it's true that religion is moral or ethical.
You don't need to follow anybody!
It's not human intelligence!
If someone doesn't value logical consistency, what logical argument are you going to give them that will demonstrate that they should?
Hello and welcome to the Godless Rebelution. Today is Wednesday, February 23rd. This is episode 370. My name is Dan Ellis, and I'm joined by two awesome co-hosts, Mr. Taylor Grin.
Hey.
And Mr. Ryan Duffy.
Who the fuck's that?
Woo! Good to see you guys. It's been a minute. I've not really had any social contact other than
us
work stuff and Tracy, which is fun. I like hanging out with her. She's good company. We get along really, really well. But yeah, what's new with you guys? Let's go with you, Ryan.
I had an interesting conversation with my grandpa today.
Oh yeah.
No.
Don't put us on a list, Ryan.
I won't put. I mean,
don't do it.
He's not a fan of Trump. He's
not a fan of Trump.
Don't make us spend our retainer with Andrew.
He doesn't really like Trump.
Uh-huh.
And if things happen to him, he won't really be sad about it.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't quite be disappointed.
Yeah, I would take it a step further and say, I'd probably have a drink or five and dance a jig and
on his grave.
Yeah,
of natural causes.
I'd be not unhappy.
I mean, we had our favorite senator in Wisconsin, Mr. McCarthy.
Uh-huh.
Who I was told in high school people would regularly go to his grave to piss on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Can't say I blame him.
No.
That's a good
I heard
thing.
at one point it was stolen.
His grave?
That's awesome.
Yeah, his headstone.
Oh.
Not they didn't steal his body. They left that piece of shit there, but they stole his headstone, which is kind of like, well, I guess you can't steal. Houdini has like a temple, so you can't really steal his.
Yeah.
But yeah, somebody had stolen Mr. McCarthy's headstone. And he was probably covered in piss anyways.
Mm-hmm.
They were just taking it out for cleaning. Yeah.
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 Other than that, not much going on here.
Yeah. Well, I'll go next. I know Taylor wanted to go last. We had Tracy's one of her puppies staying with us for about a week because Tracy's mom got very sick. She did not have COVID, but she was very, very ill. And then she's also trying to deal with, so she's got two puppies, they're litter mates, and the female is just having a really difficult time learning to go outside when she needs to go potty. Like she pees everywhere, and it's like it's not even a conscious thing. Like she's just walking and peeing. So she's taken her to the vet several different times. They've checked her for all kinds of stuff. And the vet is just like, sometimes female dogs just don't build any kind of bladder control until they're like 3 or 4 months old. So sorry, you're just going to have to wait it out. And so she wanted a week to try to work with her, and we had her little boy dog over here, Ozzy, and he's just fucking adorable. He's so goddamn cute. I should upload some video. We, in just the week that he was here, we got him going up and down stairs all over the house. We taught him to sit. We taught him to stay, wait for his cookie, fully potty trained him. He's going outside. Like, he's just an awesome, he was really smart, super cute, very friendly, lovable, cuddly dog. And we took him back on Monday, and we were very sad to see him go, but we'll still get to see him all the time anyway. But
you couldn't tell her he ran away?
No. Oh, that would be bad. Well, then she could just never come over to our house again because he would be here, and I could never post pictures of our adorable dogs. But yeah,
you adopted another one.
He's a very good boy, and he's a Boston also. So her mom, at our urging, she wanted a new dog, and we suggested a Boston, and so she got two, and that's That's good. They're fun. They're like potato chips. You can't ever have just one. They're just the best dogs ever. They're just super friendly, super smart. They're a little strong-headed, little stubborn, but they're just like adorable little clowns, man. I love them. They're the best dogs ever. So that's been fun. And then just working a ton. Oh, and I'm gonna use my best Bob Barker voice. A new car. It's so fucking cool, man. It's the 2022 GV70. It's the 3.5T Sport Prestige model in Himalayan gray with obsidian black interior. And Tracy has...
But wait, there's more.
And Tracy has already set all of the ambient lighting to be purple, so that's fun. I can't really tell, and she's excited that she can do purple, but it has like
colorblind.
Yeah, it has ambient lighting all throughout, like all along the trim and the doors and around the center console and dashboard, and it's got all the bells and whistles, like fully loaded, super fucking fancy. I don't even have to have a key. I can use my phone as a digital key. A lot of cars, crossovers and SUVs now, if you want to open the lift gate, you can like move your foot under a sensor on the rear bumper. You don't even need to do that with ours. Like you just get close to the car and it will sense your presence and open the lift gate if you stand there for like 5 seconds. The side mirrors fold in when it's locked. When you approach the vehicle, they unfold and shine this Genesis light down onto the... It's just so fucking cool, man. It will park itself. I can move the car forward and backward on the key fob. Like, it's fucking amazing. I love it. It's so much fun to drive. And
speaking of key fobs and be able to automatically open doors, Sarah did that the other night to her car at about 8 p.m. And didn't notice until I told her at like 7 in the morning when I looked on our cameras to see if it had snowed. And I was like, Sarah, your car's open. The back hatch is open, and it's been open all night.
Oops. Battery's dead. There's cats nesting in there.
That's what I was thinking was going to happen.
Well, that's it for me. What's up with you, Mr. Grin?
Oh, man. Not much. Tweaked my back just a little bit, so I've been kind of sore. If I'm a little slow this episode, it's because I finally popped a muscle relaxer to see if I could break up the spasm. Started playing a really fun game called Ghosts of Tsushima, which is like a samurai ninja kind of game. It's beautiful, like one of the most beautiful games I've ever played.
Like a video game?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
With like
Mel was telling me to play that one a while ago.
It's so much fun. Like it's very much a love letter to like Assassin's Creed or like Zelda Breath of the Wild or what have you. Like the Nathan Drake game, whatever that one is that they just made the movie of, like all that stuff. There's just great exploration, great combat, beautiful fucking imagery. The particle effects are insane. Like the way that you can see the wind blow over these grassy fields and like every blade of grass is literally moving with the wind. Like would have thought that kind of graphics was impossible 5 years ago. So
it's been
a blast. Unfortunately, that's about the only good thing in life right now. Shit's about to get whack in Europe.
Yeah. It's going a little nutski over there, as they would say.
Yeah.
I like how you made it Russian.
It is very nutski over here right now.
And I wanted to make sure that like the folks who listen to our show, who probably also listen to a bunch of other stuff. So I don't imagine that they're uninformed, but I wanted to make sure that like our listeners had some background. I'm going to start with something that's kind of breaking news. Just because I thought it was really inspiring. And then I'm going to go into a short history of Ukraine. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on right now and our thoughts on it. And then I've got kind of a pick me up at the end of the episode. So, you can have your pudding if you eat your meat, get through this episode. And I've got something really sweet for you at the end.
Awesome.
I like meat.
Oh, Ryan.
So starting with this, Zelensky, the prime minister of Ukraine, has just made an address to the Russian people, which he delivered in the Russian language.
I saw some transcript from this.
Today, I initiated a phone call with the president of the Russian Federation. The result was silence, though the silence should be in Donbass. As a result, I want to address the citizens of Russia. We are separated by more than 2,000 kilometers of mutual borders, along which 200,000 of your soldiers and 1,000 armored vehicles are standing. Your leadership has approved their step forward onto the territory of another country. This step could be the beginning of a big war. The cause could come up at any moment, any provocation, any spark, a spark that could burn everything down. You are told that this flame will liberate the people of Ukraine, but the Ukrainian people are free. You are told we hate Russian culture. How can one hate a culture? Neighbors always enrich each other, culturally. However, that doesn't make them a single whole. It doesn't dissolve us into you. We are different, but that is not a reason to be enemies. Listen to the voice of reason. The people of Ukraine want peace. The authorities in Ukraine want peace. They want it, and they are doing everything they can for it. We don't need war. But if we are attacked, if someone attempts to take away our land, our freedom, our lives, the lives of our children, we will defend ourselves. We won't attack, but defend ourselves. By attacking, you will see our faces, not our backs, but our faces. War will remove guarantees from everyone. No one will have security guarantees anymore. Who will suffer most from all of this? People. Who wants this the least? People. Who cannot allow this to happen? People. There are these people among you, I'm sure of it. I know this speech of mine won't be shown on Russian TV, but the people of Russia need to see it. They need to know the truth. The truth is that this must be stopped before it is too late. And if the leadership of Russia does not want to sit down at the table for peace with us, then maybe it will want to sit down at a table with you. Do Russians want war? I would very much like the answer to this question, but the answer depends only on you, the citizens of the Russian Federation.
That's not good, man. I mean, that was a good speech. Just the whole situation is not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Russia is definitely winning the propaganda war.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes and no. Like domestically, probably. Abroad, I would disagree.
Yeah.
I don't know. They got Fox News on the hook.
I mean, they do. But honestly, what the Biden administration has been doing has been revolutionary in terms of intelligence sharing. No administration has ever been this open about intelligence reports in the past, and it's completely disabled a disinformation basis for a false flag attack. It's honestly brilliant watching it happen in real time.
I completely agree with you, but the people that are watching Fox News right now are agreeing that Russia has the right to do this.
Yeah.
Because of the shit they're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and I'm hoping that by this episode, our listeners will be better equipped to counter, the disinformation that they hear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm excited to learn.
Without any further ado,
I was just going to say I'm excited to learn more about it. Starting on the other side of this.
This break.
Small break.
Okay, maybe a little bit more ado.
Hey, this is Caitlin, and if you sign your kids up for youth sports, make sure to volunteer to coach. Thanks, and you're listening to the Godless Rebelution.
Looking at 2-state and 1-state, and I like the one that both parties like. I'm very happy with the one that both parties like. I can live with either one.
Thank you to everybody who has rated the show on iTunes and Stitcher and are following us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And to all our Patreon patrons, you make the show possible.
And welcome back. So at the outset of this, one thing that I do want to remind the listeners is even though I've done work with like the DoD before, none of it has involved like the region of Ukraine or Russia involvement in Europe or anything like that.
And this is all open source information.
Yep. Yeah. Everything that we're about to talk about is available on the news, has nothing to do with anything else I've done in the past for the government. And you'll have to apologize or apologize. I have to apologize. You'll have to bear with me. I'm probably going to have a lot of breathing sounds tonight just because of the pain I'm in. If that fucks with you in terms of like a sound issue, I'm really sorry. So anyway, let me go into some of Ukraine's history. Long before Ukraine was independent, it was a region that had a strong local identity while simultaneously being ruled over by everyone from Greeks and Persians, Mongols, Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. The Kievan Rus are a distinct ethnic group that tends to be a unifying factor for the country. However, it has disputed origins, which there are two prevailing theories, one of which is that they are Vikings who basically trekked inland with their trade with northern Baltic countries and settled in the Kiev region. And an alternate hypothesis is that they're basically a proto-Russian people who were like ethnically distinct from the other groups in the region. What is important is that starting in the 1800s, Ukraine began to be Russified. However, their art and literature was fairly stable in retaining a unique Ukrainian culture. The period between like 800 and 1800 was not good for Ukraine. It was just a constant swapping of hands of like what nation was dominating that land region. During that 1800s time period, the Tsarist regime started pushing a narrative that the Kievan Rus were an orphaned Russian people who were separated from the Rus by the Mongols. Put a pin in this. We'll pull it out much, much later because Putin is making a similar claim today.
And just I don't mean to divert you too much.
No, yeah.
But I get upset or not. It's a little nit that I like to pick when people say the Ukraine. I don't know why the fuck people say the Ukraine. We don't say the China or the Japan. Mm-hmm. I hear news people saying that all the time, and things are going bad in the Ukraine. It's just Ukraine. It's not the Ukraine.
I know it's a holdover from when Ukraine was a republic in the USSR. I suspect that it has something to do with like a linguistic carryover from translations from Russia. Russian.
What I figured is that it had to have been something in Ukraine's past that it was at one time known as like the Ukrainian Republic of whatever, or the Ukrainian so-and-so, and people then would just shorten it to the Ukraine or the Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And now they just say that all the time. It's one of those little nitpicky things that bothers me.
Well, it's something I notice more with Cold Warriors than younger people too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I do that, like it's only because of my influence from the same, right?
Yeah.
But I've tried to purge that from my own vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably why it stands out for me, is because when I was much younger, I used to say the Ukraine, and finally somebody corrected me and they're like, why do you keep doing that? Why do you keep saying the Ukraine? It's Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to sidetrack you.
No, you're good. You're good. That's a great point to bring up. The first 15, 17 years of the 1900s were not good for Russia. The Tsarist government was overthrown. Ukraine briefly knew autonomy during that time period, and they immediately established a free press, free speech, and free assembly. They lifted Tsarist restrictions on minorities and started treating Jewish people in the region much better. One thing to know about like historical Russia and present day Russia is they're very anti-Semitic. Ukraine also established a parliament in Kiev. Initially, the Provisional government of Russia, which was a sort of like interregnum government between the fall of the Tsarists and the takeover of the Bolsheviks, they recognized Ukraine's right to autonomy. But when the Bolsheviks took control in 1917, relations broke down almost immediately. Ukraine's parliament refused to acknowledge the Bolshevik regime as having authority over their nation and declared independence. However, they did treat themselves as a member of an overall Russian federation, which is a theme that will persist for the next 100 years.
We're independent except for when Big Daddy Bear says we're not.
Right. Well, it's almost like a confederacy of nations, the way that the EU is a confederacy of nations. They wanted to have like a favored trading status and cultural underpinning with Russia, Belarus, the other Baltics, that kind of thing. But they did not want to lose their autonomy now that they had just gotten it. There are books and books and books worth of bullshit that happened during World War I. I'm not going to get into all of it. It will bore you. I will say that there was a lot of violence, a lot of fighting over who would control what regions, and just a shit ton of anti-Semitic violence that occurred during World War I in Ukraine. By the end of World War I, Ukraine was broken up into chunks, some of which were split among its neighbors in Romania, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, and the rest of it, including Kiev, fell under Soviet control with what would have been like a proto-USSR. Under the Soviet rule, all of Ukraine's governmental and cultural autonomy was abrogated. There is also a massive genocide caused by collectivism efforts to separate Ukrainians from their farmland, known as the Holodomor. This killed more than 4 million Ukrainians in 1 year alone.
Wow.
Yeah. Again, like there's books worth of stuff about the Holodomor. It's also important to note that Russian shills will call this a natural famine.
Oh, Tulsi Gabbard? Okay.
Yeah. Also, yes. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I've heard of the lead famine.
Oh, yeah.
If you get what I'm saying.
During World War II, Germany and Russia basically took turns bending Ukraine over. Nazis who invaded Ukraine used them as what they referred to as Eastern workers. They enslaved the Ukrainians. And then when the Russians retook control of the territory, they did like this weird ethnic swap with Poland, which they also held, where any Poles who had been living in Ukraine, no matter how many generations, versus any Ukrainian ethnic people in Poland were just picked up and traded between the two countries. And the USSR did that so that each country would have a distinct ethnic identity population.
That's weird.
Yeah. Following World War II, Stalin treated the Ukrainians like shit, and more of them died from artificial famines. Khrushchev was a little better, allowing Eastern Ukrainians some more cultural autonomy while Russifying Western Ukraine. One important transition during this period was to shift the Crimean Peninsula from Russian domain to Ukrainian oversight. Gorbachev, the last Soviet leader, recognized the USSR's significant economic issues, and we've fast forwarded several decades because not much changed during Khrushchev's rule. In 1986, he started the policy of Perestroika, which was the restructuring of the economy to recognize more localized autonomy of markets, and also glasnost, which lifted some of the restrictions on idea exchange with countries outside of the USSR. If you've taken an American history class, this will probably be one of the last things you cover before the semester's over and the teacher's rushing to get through content. And it's right before the fall of the USSR.
Mm-hmm.
By 1989, Ukraine had developed mass movements for nationalization and had reinstituted Ukrainian as their national language. Groups like the Ukrainian Helsinki Union wanted restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty, restoration of human rights, and the transformation of the USSR into a genuine confederation of independent states. Think more like the EU versus the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
The USSR opposed this and made propaganda attacks against Ukrainian media. They arrested protesters and so on. But it's a far cry from literally putting people in gulags and concentration camps, which they had done in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
In 1990, Ukraine held elections for their parliament again, breaking the monopoly on power by the Supreme Soviet running the region. Members of Ukrainians' pro-democratic factions seized a sizable minority and began extracting concessions from the USSR party line members of parliament. The pressure here and elsewhere led Gorbachev to draft plans for a new Soviet Union treaty that would have guaranteed broad autonomy to Soviet republics like Ukraine and Belarus. However, in 1991, Gorbachev loyalists attempted a coup on Ukraine. It failed within 2 days, and the parliament then ratified full independence by the end of the year. That was the fall of the Soviet Union, the true fall of the Soviet Union. It's important to note some numbers here. After nearly a full century of authoritarian rule, including mass genocide and concentration camps under the USSR, through repression of their language, literature, religion, and culture, 84% of eligible voters turned out for the referendum.
Wow.
And of those 84% who turned out for the referendum, 94% endorsed independence.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when you look at the map of the regions and the percentage of votes they got in, it's like, that's kind of unheard of.
84% of eligible voters. Can you imagine if the U.S. had that kind of voter turnout? That would be amazing.
Right? Yeah. Between then and now, it's important to know that Crimea has always been a sore spot with Russia because of that control that was transferred to Ukraine. In 1994, there was a brief attempt by Crimea to separate from Ukraine. Ukraine also became aware of a large number of nuclear weapons that the USSR had held there and elsewhere within Ukraine. At the time, they were technically the world's third largest nuclear power, but they lacked the skills, economy, and defense to maintain the arsenal. They stopped Crimea from separating from Ukraine by exposing corruption in the vote that was to make it autonomous, and they started making an agreement with the U.S. to divest themselves of the nukes in exchange for a guarantee of independence should Russia come knocking, because they knew at the time that because they had nukes, Russia wouldn't do anything to them. Mm-hmm. But they also knew they couldn't really keep those nukes safe. In 1994 as well, following a mostly fair and free election, which is pretty big for a former Soviet republic. Like, it was legitimately mostly free and fair. There was a peaceful transfer of power to a new prime minister who, while more Russia friendly, continued the course for Ukraine. This would include founding a special partnership with Nato and joining the Council of Europe. Fast forward about 10 years and we get closer to the present day. We're going to get into some hard names here, and I'm sorry, there's really no way to make it easier. Yanukovych was a pro-Russia, Putin-supported candidate who initially won an election, but then was credibly accused of vote rigging. A rerun of that vote was held, and Yushchenko, a pro-Western prime minister, won through the support of a third party. During this time, Yushchenko tightened Ukraine's allegiance with the EU and NATO.
Good.
In 2010, Yanukovych regained control of Ukraine. And it's really important to point out here that in 2008, the State Department noted that a U.S.-based lobbyist who was named Paul Manafort was helping doing the PR campaign for Yanukovych in order to help him restore his image and win the prime ministership.
And this is part of his needing to identify or release that information that he was a lobbyist for all of this, right? That was a bit of a scandal when he was Trump's campaign manager.
Mm-hmm. Among many others, yeah. Right, he had also been involved in several very corrupt elections in the African continent, if I recall correctly, as well. When Yanukovych regained control of Ukraine in 2010, he immediately abandoned Ukraine's plans to join NATO and began corruptly imprisoning his political opponents. In 2013, just days before an association agreement with the EU would be signed, he bailed out of that agreement. Massive protests started in Ukraine's Maidan, which is like an independence square that they have, were held. And these protests were nuts. In the dead of Ukrainian winter, cops were shooting the protesters with water out of hoses, and the protesters were building what were essentially massive igloo forts to defend themselves against the police. It was I
can remember watching I remember seeing videos of that square where they're based. Yeah, they fortified themselves into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like an adult snowball fight with water cannons and tear gas. Due to those protests, Parliament voted to remove Yanukovych, who then fled to Russia.
Surprise.
Shortly thereafter, sorry, go ahead.
Surprise.
Yeah, right. Shortly thereafter, Little Green Men, which was the sort of catchphrase for Russian mercenaries, and potentially Russian like ununiformed special forces started to appear in Crimea. Communication lines were cut, media offices were moved into, and Crimea held a, quote fingers, referendum to declare themselves Russian. Russia quickly moved to incorporate Crimea and simultaneously began to seize sections of industrial eastern Ukraine, including Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Those are the regions under dispute right now.
Yep.
In the same year, a surface-to-air missile, probably from the Russian side, shot down a Malaysian Airlines airplane carrying mostly Dutch citizens.
Yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Didn't
With
they
the
claim
release
it was
of
an
the
accident?
Yeah,
an accidental firing?
Yeah. With the release of the Panama Papers, documentation that showed many rich folks hiding away money, then Prime Minister of Ukraine, Poroshenko, was also implicated. He lost his re-election in 2019, and the new Prime Minister, Zelensky, won on a campaign of anti-corruption with more than 73% of support in parliament, which is like, you don't need to form a multi-party majority at that point. Like, you can make laws.
Wow.
In that same year, Donald Trump was impeached for trying to leverage $400 million in military aid to Ukraine in exchange for an investigation of Biden's son, who sat on a natural gas company's board.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that.
Yeah.
As soon as President Biden took office in 2021, Zelensky asked the U.S. if they could join NATO. However, full membership was not offered. Instead, they were given an increased level of allegiance similar to that of countries like Sweden. By the end of 2021,
they're like a partner, aren't they? Basically,
yeah. But they don't fall under Article 5.
No,
if Ukraine gets attacked, the rest of NATO
won't come. We don't get full military support.
Yep. By the end of 2021, Russia had begun massing large amounts of materiel on the border of Ukraine and Belarus. As of a few days before this recording, shelling and troop movements have begun in eastern Ukraine, and the US and EU have responded with sanctions. That pin at the very beginning of this, we'll pull it out now, in a speech that was given as of the time of this recording yesterday. One of the things that Vladimir Putin brought up in an hour-long speech he gave to the Russian people was this idea that the USSR had split Russian people into different districts, calling them different countries like Belarus and Ukraine and Russia, where they were all just one Russian people. And if the Ukrainians wanted to forget their heritage of being Russian people, then Russia should take away the territories that Russia gave them. And that was his ideological, propagandistic justification for trying to seize potentially more than just eastern Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that should put a bit of a shiver up the spine of Lukashenko, right? The leader of Belarus, who's buddy with Putin. I mean, he's basically Putin's puppet anyway, but it sounds like Putin is also kind of throwing down the gauntlet of, you'd better stay on my side or I'll just fucking take over Belarus too.
Well, I mean, Belarus already has a ton of Russian troops on the border of Ukraine and sitting in Belarus. So Belarus is all for Russia right now. They're like, yep, come do whatever you want. I mean, that's where they're playing their war games before shit went south.
I mean, the difference between Belarus and Ukraine is pretty much the like real world manifestation of it's better to be the right hand of the devil than in his path. So the sanctions that the Biden administration pushed yesterday, in this case, the U.S. has blocked any interaction with the Vnesheconombank, or VEB, which is Russia's fifth largest bank. We didn't even do this much back in 2014 with the seizure of Crimea. And these sanctions against Vnesheconombank were matched by the EU. We also individually targeted executives from some of the larger banks in Russia and are reserving sanctions against those same top 5 banks in the event that Russia goes further than they already have. One of the important things about sanctions is that you leave yourself room to do more. You don't throw all of your sanctions up front.
Yeah, you got to save some room to ratchet up more sanctions.
Yeah, which I was watching one press briefing today where it was a U.S., one of the security guys, and they're asking, why didn't you put sanctions against Putin's direct, bank accounts? And they're like, well, right now we're targeting his friends, people who might have influence with him. like the oligarchs, the people that are surrounding him to hopefully put pressure on him. Mm-hmm. And, if we're going forward, we, like you said, don't go all in right off the bat. If Ukraine starts firing rounds and going further in, okay, Putin, we're going to take everything from you.
Yep. So, that's it. That's the history. I just wanted to make sure that like you had a slightly better than what you probably got in high school history, 20 years ago, version of what's gone on in Ukraine for the last, relevant 100 years or so.
Oh yeah. I definitely learned more about the Eastern Bloc in these last roughly 20 minutes than I learned throughout all of my high school career.
And it's super interesting. Like that part of Europe has really gotten just not a good hand dealt to them. They've been pinched between aspiring empires for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And I hope someday the peoples in that region can just like rest.
Mm-hmm.
And, this whole war started, what's happening right now, I think essentially started 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you had those areas of Donetsk and,
Luhansk.
Luhansk. I'm trying to say it with the Russian way. Basically, like you said, the little green men. It wasn't citizens that decided to free themselves. It's fucking Russia putting these people in there. So you're not freeing the citizens of Ukraine. No, this has been Russian influence the entire fucking time once they didn't have the control they wanted.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't get into as much as I probably could have is that there's a major dry dock, Sevastopol, in that area. And it has been the site of most of Russia's fleet. When Ukraine split from the USSR and declared their independence, for the first decade or so, there were pretty considerable conflicts between Ukraine and Russia over ownership of that fleet. And for a while, Ukraine was saying, no, we're going to take the whole thing. And Russia threatened to go to war with them. So instead, they created like a lease agreement, basically, where like Ukraine was billing Russia for the use of the port in Crimea. And in exchange, they were like alternating ownership of the actual ships posted there. And one of the biggest motivations for Russia to take Crimea now is for that port.
Doesn't Odessa also have a large port? Isn't that also a large port in Rail City in southern Ukraine?
That rings true. Yes.
Because I just find it interesting that Russia says they're going in there on a peacekeeping mission, yet for this peacekeeping mission, there's reports of large amounts of Russian naval fleets sitting off the southern end of Ukraine, that can move in and do whatever they want. And it's probably going to be, just guessing, right in there to Odessa, where these ports are. And that is not in a contested area. That is 100% part of Ukraine. But, I mean, they would love to have control of that and have control of the entire Black Sea, probably.
Yeah.
Or at least the northern half of the Black Sea, cutting Ukraine off from any water access. Yeah, I don't think it looks good.
No. And I just wanted to make sure that we got into a little bit of the history of Ukraine, showed how they have just gotten beat up by Russia for more than 100 years, more than 200 years. Mm-hmm. I wanted to make sure to disabuse some of the propaganda. One of the ones you'll hear the most, especially even from people on the right,
is Russia has ownership to it.
Right. Or specifically the one that I wanted to get at was the so-called expansion of NATO. And I like to use this analogy. There's a difference between asking someone on a date and being asked on a date. NATO doesn't really expand per se. Countries are allowed to ask to join NATO. And if they meet the qualifications, NATO will accept them. Right. It's not like NATO has missionaries, right, that knock on the door of countries adjacent to Russia and says, hey, would you like to join us? Mm-hmm. Those countries who don't want to be taken over by Russia go to NATO and say, hey, we will contribute to the cause. Please help protect us. Yeah. And polarization, right? Or the polarity of that relationship is very important. And people who want you to not support Ukraine will try and reverse that polarity and make it seem like NATO is somehow imperialist for what they do.
And I mean, that's also why when, I guess, talks broke down between Russia and everyone else, it's like, well, no, the one thing Russia is asking for is that we are never allowed to let Ukraine in, which is complete bullshit. If they want that protection, they get it.
Yeah. So what I would like to do, I promised that I would give y'all something that's a little bit more uplifting. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back to our last segment where I'm going to give you a much happier story.
Hey, all you dirty cis people out there who think you run the world. This is the trans podcaster, Marissa Alexa McCool, coming to say that you should go sit in the corner and listen to other people talk. And the people you should listen to are the Godless Rebelution folks, because they're the good kind of cis people. We don't have to shame them just as much. So you go ahead and listen to them, and then you come listen to us so we can tell them why they need to apologize.
So to be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
If you have questions, comments, concerns, compliments, corrections, criticisms, or concepts for content, contact the show via email at godlessrebelution@gmail.com, by text or voicemail at 330-81-REBEL, or Twitter the twatter at TGR Podcast. Thank you!
All right, welcome back. And I promised I'd give you something uplifting. Let's start with some starvation. So after
always uplifting starvation. That's my favorite. It's when I need a good, heartfelt story, I always turn to stories of starvation.
Yeah, I love when my stomach is cramping and growling at me.
After World War II, Germany was split in half between the Allied nations and the USSR. This was largely done because the Russians distrusted Europe's ability to keep Germany from restoring itself again. Skepticism that came from, the Versailles Treaty falling apart. They had a total unwillingness to allow Germany to once again acquire power. Because the capital of Germany, Berlin, was inside the eastern half of Germany, which was controlled by the USSR, Berlin itself was divided into sectors. One half was controlled by the USSR. The other half was split between America, Britain, and France. So an island of Allied-controlled Berlin in a sea of USSR-held East Germany. From June 1948 until May 1949, tensions between the West and the USSR reached a peak. Moscow decided to blockade Western Berlin from entering Eastern Berlin. They cut off all rail and road access to the city, leaving 2 million people without access to food, fuel, medicine, or other necessities. Thus began the Berlin Airlift. 278,000 flights carrying 2 million tons of supplies over 15 months were channeled into Berlin. The flights ran literally 24/7.
That's a lot of fucking planes and flights, man.
Yeah.
To put it in perspective, there were times when there was a plane landing every 3 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. Utah resident Gail Halverson was one of those pilots who himself flew 190 of the Berlin Airlift missions. While he was waiting between flights, he saw a group of Berliner children at a fence, and he gave them what he had in his pocket, just 2 sticks of gum, which were split amongst the 4 kids there. The Berliners were being kept from starvation, but they were still very hungry. And these kids had not had anything to look forward to in a long time. So Halverson began his candy bombing campaign. When his plane approached Berlin, he would wobble the plane on one axis, which caused the wings to noticeably wiggle. Before landing, he would drop chocolates and other candies in parcels with small parachutes to the kids below. They would know the plane was his because of the wobbling wings.
That's adorable.
Well, it's basically like you shake your wings. It's kind of like it's like a nodding saying hello.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. He got caught when a German journalist started reporting the story. Initially, his superiors chastised him and nearly court-martialed him for doing the unauthorized drop. And then shortly thereafter told him to carry on. My guess is that somebody at the State Department slapped that senior officer around and told them what good press this would be.
The
right?
fuck are you thinking? He's doing a good thing. It's a wonderful feel-good story, and you want to court-martial him? Are you fucking stupid?
Yep.
It's like, we're going to be ran through the fucking ringers if press hears we court-martial the guy for giving kids fucking candy.
He's giving them candy instead of actual bombs. Like that. What are you? Jesus. We're trying to win a PR war here too, man.
It's important to know that, like, this is 1948, 1949. If these were little kids, they were born in Nazi Germany, and all they ever knew of America was stories of things like the Dresden bombing.
Mm-hmm.
The campaign would grow larger than Halverson, becoming known as Operation Little Vittles. And by the end of the airlift, the U.S. would have dropped more than 23 tons of candy on little parachutes.
Wow.
Gail Halverson died February 16th of this year at 101 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a very cool and heartwarming story all about.
And I say we change it. He didn't die. He lived to be 101.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's a very heartwarming story all about bombing children with candy.
With candy. Well, and the thing that I think is really important to remember is that in the upcoming weeks, months, maybe even years, is that there could very well be a siege in the western parts of Ukraine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where people who live life just like we do are going to be living life very differently than we do. And there may come a time when we have to send supplies into an isolated and besieged Kiev. And when that happens, remember that that's our country doing what it should do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could be happening before this fucking podcast gets put out.
Right.
Hell, it could be happening right now. We haven't been watching the news this whole fucking 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, we live in dangerous times, man. It's not good, and it's not. I don't see that social media is helping as far as the propaganda or PR war. I talked to you guys a little bit in between segments that earlier today, just in doing some stinker tinker on Facebook. Well, I was taking a shit and surfing Facebook. I noticed a couple different threads. I ended up blocking, I think, more than a half dozen people just over the course of maybe 10 minutes while I was in the bathroom, because there was a thread I saw where somebody posted a meme about it was the stupid fucking pawn shop people, and it's like, well, we want socialized healthcare, or we want, our student debt wiped away. And then the next panel is Biden, and it's best I can do is World War III.
Oh, jeez.
And it's like, yeah. And, my comment was, yeah, sure. All of the problems in Ukraine right now are Biden's fault.
Yeah.
And then that, of course, started an argument. Well, no, that's not what this is about. It's about he's not focusing on things here domestically. Okay, well, people can do more than one fucking thing at a time. Maybe in your limited capacity, you can only do one thing at a time, but that's not the case here. People can handle more than one crisis and more than one issue at a time. So this is just, it's fucking nonsense. And then all of these Russian troll farm people started commenting, and you go and look at their profiles, and they're opened very recently. They have very few friends. They're all common friends with each other. Mm-hmm. And they're all friends with these fucking Bernie bros and Gabbard gals that fucking think that Bernie Sanders somehow could have done a much better job as president with the Senate the way it is and the House the way it is, with narrow margins, and Bernie losing the popular vote anyway twice to run for president.
Right.
And then Tulsi Gabbard going to speak at CPAC. It's just, these people are fucking nuts. They're so ill-informed about the world at large that it's shocking and disappointing. And I don't have any patience for them anymore. And so it ends up, I'll try to engage a little bit. And at the first instance or hint of Russian propaganda, a couple of the people made comments about, well, why should we bother helping Ukraine? Because they're just a bunch of neo-Nazis anyway. Okay, well, you've bought the Russian propaganda hook, line, and sinker, so congratulations. Or you're just a Russian troll yourself, so I have no time for that kind of stupid nonsense.
And at that point, fall back on it's not about persuading them, it's about persuading everyone else. And if there's not a good audience, then disengage.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. These were people with not a very large audience, not much participation or following of their posts or anything. And then the few people that were very active on their timeline were like very obviously just Russian troll farms.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, I even saw Marjorie Taylor Greene blaming Kamala Harris for going over there to speak and saying, well, we sent her over there and look, now we're going to war. Like, she's horrible.
Yeah, it's all Harris's fault that we're going to war now.
It's like every country sent someone to this talk. It wasn't just her, and she has no control over what the fuck Russia does.
Yeah, well, and then I hear a lot of complaints about, well, Biden's not doing anything domestically, and all he's doing is talking about Russia and Ukraine. And it's like, yeah, he's talking about Russia and Ukraine in order to help avert a war. And that's all of a sudden a bad fucking thing?
A war in Europe is not good for anyone.
Yeah.
It's bad for the entire fucking world.
Well, why are we doing anything over there in Ukraine instead of just handling our business here? Well, historically speaking, ignoring the actions of dictators in the Eastern Bloc has not led to good outcomes, especially when we hear Putin saying how great Stalin was about a bunch of different things. It's like, I'll bet most people alive these days who are actively participating in social media know fuck all about Stalin and all of the killing that went on under his regime. And then to have Putin lionize Stalin and say how great he was and that he wants to return to a lot of Stalinist ideology is like, holy fucking shit, man. That's really, really bad. We should all be super concerned about that.
I wouldn't doubt that Putin has personally killed people.
Oh yeah. 100%. Yes.
And I'm not talking about when he worked with the KGB. I'm talking about as a fucking politician, him personally taking out that are dissenters of his.
I'm willing to bet that he blew up that building in 1998. Do you mind if I interject real quick? Because
no,
Dan, your statement made me paranoid a moment ago, and so I started threading through the top posts or the most recent posts in the World News subreddit.
Yeah.
And I caught a headline that harkens back to a conversation I think we had on there. I don't think it was in between our shows, but Trudeau has ended the use of the Emergencies Act in response to the truck nuts.
Is that true?
So he has officially said there is no longer a need for the Emergency Act. The situation is no longer an emergency, and he immediately canceled his increased powers granted under said Emergency Act.
Weird. How's that going to play into the narrative of him becoming an authoritarian dictator in Canada?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. That's strange. It's weird.
So weird that he would just relinquish those powers as soon as he no longer needed them.
That's not a dictator play.
This runs completely counter to what I originally thought. How can I weave this into my conspiracy now?
There's a Cincinnatus joke in here somewhere, but I can't quite get to it.
It's just not encouraging news pretty much anywhere in the world. I'm very happy to see a lot of the NATO allies and surrounding countries in that region doing what they can to support Ukraine, if not with full military force, at least in spirit and through sanctions and cooperation among the NATO nations. It was cool to see Germany light up the Brandenburg Gate in Ukrainian national flag colors. That was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, just all of the apparent solidarity among the rest of the developed world in standing against what Russia is doing. I just hope that it doesn't lead us all into World War III, but I don't know what we can do to try to stop Putin at this point from just slaughtering tens of thousands, perhaps millions of people.
Well, Finland has now said that they think that membership in NATO should remain an option for Ukraine. Poland and Lithuania have just said that Ukraine deserves EU candidate status because of their security challenges. Yeah.
It would be...
I mean, what happens if we bring them into NATO tonight? There's supposed to be a vote to... It's not on them bringing them into NATO, but there's supposed to be a UN Council vote tonight on what to do, which, of course, Russia is going to vote against.
Right. Well, and there's talk amongst policy wonks, but not necessarily politicians that I've seen, and I've only given cursory glances to things. But there's talk among policy wonks of removing Russia from the National Security Council.
They should.
Under the same grounds as when the USSR was starting up shit back in like the 40s and 50s.
I don't see why they're still allowed a seat at the table when they're the ones causing the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, as a firefighter, if there's a house on fire, the person who started the fire doesn't get to make decisions on how we act.
Right.
Yeah. And appeasing dictators has historically been a really fucking bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that went a little bit long. I'm sorry. I promised you guys a short script and I was wrong. Survey says that was a lie.
No.
Didn't mean it.
No, you're totally fine, man. But we have exceeded the time allotted for our shows these days. So we're going to wrap things up. So, before we go, though, I want to make sure that we thank our Patreon subscribers because they help keep the show going. Let's have Ryan go first and then you, Taylor, and I'll go third.
Hopefully you're not fucking me. Two skeptical chaps.
A noble spirit embiggens the smallest man. A perfectly cromulent statement.
Alan Firth.
All hail Peanut Buttra.
Darwin is coming.
Doug Willoughby.
Hunter Grin.
Is it just me, or are these patrons amazing?
Yeah.
They indeed are. John McCullough.
Ollie Olson.
Sinead Duffy.
Steve Cuno.
Steven Andrews.
Ted Sellen.
Tiffany Hudson.
Vanessa.
Corey Ebert.
Don't be a Richard.
Freethinker 215.
Good news, everyone.
Jeff Peterson.
Jeremy Goodson.
Jonathan.
Marvin Dracon.
Matthew Sanders.
Megan Mitchell.
Not a fucking gymnast.
I don't know why that's my favorite one. Brexit says fucking in it. Updog Programmer.
Utah Outcasts.
Wesley Aaron.
Zeus 9SO.
Janet Uter.
Purple Dragon.
Sarah Segovia.
Savita Kuna.
Socialized Healthcare saved my life.
Tim Jacobson.
Trisha Weir.
James.
Professor Frink and Mr. Burns want you to please support the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan.
Woo! Thank you all so very much for your patronage of this show. If you, dear listener, would like to become a Patreon patron, you can do so very easily by going to patreon.com/GodlessRebelution, where you can contribute as little as $1 per episode. And then you get all kinds of fun things like extended episodes, bonus episodes, extended outtakes, clips from the cutting room floor, all kinds of fun stuff like that. But I'm going to go now. I keep getting dinged here on my work computer from people wanting to talk to me because I'm in the habit of putting in 12 to 14 hour workdays now.
Tell them it's 7 o'clock at night and work is done.
Which is awesome. Let me tell you how great.
Sorry. I need to cut that. I confused myself. That's 0.1 to the muscle relaxers.
Trump, as he's talking about how awesome Putin is.
He's the greatest dictator. I mean, president ever.
Yeah.
He's wonderful. We loved each other a lot. We docked several times in private meetings. I don't know. That's what the kids are calling it, docking.
Yeah.
It's a thing. I don't know.